a less dashing line should she take darling Lucia and Georgie into the charmed circle, and, while retaining her own right of treasure trove, yet share it with them in some inner ring, dispensing the Guru to them, if they were good, in small doses. Mrs Quantock's mind resembled in its working the manoeuvres of a moth distracted by the glory of several bright lights. It dashed at one, got slightly singed, and forgetting all about that, turned its attention to the second and the third, taking headers into each in turn, without deciding which, on the whole, was the most enchanting of those luminaries. So, in order to curb the exuberance of these frenzied excursions, she got a half sheet of paper and noted down the alternatives that she must choose from. 1. Shall I keep him entirely to myself? 2. Shall I run him for all he is worth and leave out L? 3. Shall I get G on my side? 4. Shall I give L and G bits? She paused a moment, then, remembering that he had voluntarily helped her very pretty housemaid to make the beds that morning, saying that his business, like the Prince of Wales, was to serve, she added, 5. Shall I ask him to be my cook? For a few seconds the brightness of her eager interest was dimmed as the unworthy suspicion occurred to her that perhaps the prettiness of her housemaid had something to do with his usefulness in the bedrooms, but she instantly dismissed it. There was the bottle of brandy, too, which he had ordered from Rush's. When she had begged him to order anything he wanted and cause it to be put down to her account, she had not actually contemplated brandy. Then, remembering that one of the most necessary conditions for progress in yoga was that the disciple should have complete confidence in the Guru, she chased that also out of her mind. But still, even when the lines of all possible policies were written down, she could come to no decision, and, putting her paper by her bed, decided to sleep over it. The rhythmical sounds of hallowed breathing came steadily from next door, and she murmured Om, Om in time with them. The hours of the morning between breakfast and lunch were the time which the inhabitants of Riseholme chiefly devoted to spying on each other. They went about from shop to shop on household businesses, occasionally making purchases which they carried away with them in little paper parcels with convenient loops of string. But the real object of these excursions was to see what everybody else was doing, and learn what fresh interests had sprung up like mushrooms during the night. Georgie would be matching silk at the draper's, and very naturally he would carry them from the obscurity of the interior to the door, in order to be certain about the shades, and keep his eyes on the comings and goings in the street. And very naturally Mr Lucas, on his way to the market gardener's to inquire whether he had yet received the bulbs from Holland, would tell him that Lucia had received the piano arrangement of the Mozart trio. Georgie, for his part, would mention that Hermy and Ursie were expected that evening, and Peppino, enriched by this item, would toddle on, as his phrase went, to meet and exchange confidences with the next spy. He had noticed incidentally that Georgie carried a small oblong box with hard corners, which, perfectly correctly, he conjectured to be cigarettes for Hermy and Ursie, since Georgie never smoked. "Well, I must be toddling on," he said, after identifying Georgie's box of cigarettes, and being rather puzzled by a bulge in Georgie's pocket. "You'll be looking in some time this morning, perhaps?" Georgie had not been quite sure that he would, for he was very busy owing to the arrival of his sisters, and the necessity of going to Mr Holroyd's, in order that that artist might accurately match the shade of his hair with a view to the expensive toupee. But the mention of the arrival of the Mozart now decided him. He intended anyhow, before he went home for lunch, to stroll past the Hurst and see if he did not hear, to adopt a mixed metaphor, the sound of the diligent practice of that classical morsel going on inside. Probably the soft pedal would be down, but he had marvellously acute hearing, and he would be very much surprised if he did not hear the recognizable chords, and even more surprised if, when they came to practice the piece together, Lucia did not give him to understand that she was reading it for the first time. He had already got a copy and had practised his part last night, but then he was in the superior position of not having a husband who would inadvertently tell on him. Meantime, it was of the first importance to get that particular shade of purple silk that had none of that tarsome magenta tint in it. Meantime also it was of even greater importance to observe the movements of Riseholme. Just opposite was the village green, and as nobody was quite close to him, Georgie put on his spectacles, which he could whisk off in a moment. It was these which formed that bulge in his pocket which Peppino had noticed. But the fact of his using spectacles at all was a secret that would have to be profoundly kept for several years yet. But as there was no one at all near him, he stealthily adjusted them on his small straight nose. The morning train from town had evidently come in, for there was a bustle of cabs about the door of the Ambermere Arms. And a thing that thrilled him to the marrow was the fact that Lady Ambermere's motor was undoubtedly among them. That must surely mean that Lady Ambermere herself was here, for when poor thin Miss Lisle, her companion, came into Riseholme to do shopping, or transact such business as the majestic life at the Hall required, she always came on foot, or in very inclement weather in a small two-wheeled cart like a hip bath. At this moment, steeped in conjecture, who should appear walking stiffly with her nose in the air, as if suspecting and not choosing to verify some faint unpleasant odour, but Lady Ambermere herself, coming from the direction of the Hurst. Clearly she must have got there after Peppino had left, or he would surely have mentioned the fact that Lady Ambermere had been at the Hurst, if she had been at the Hurst. It is true that she was only coming from the direction of the Hurst, but Georgie put into practice in his mental processes Darwin's principle, that in order to observe usefully you must have a theory. Georgie's theory was that Lady Ambermere had been at the Hurst just for a minute or two, and hastily put his spectacles in his pocket. With the precision of a trained mind he also formed the theory that some business had brought Lady Ambermere into Riseholme, and that taking advantage of her presence there she had probably returned a verbal answer to Lucia's invitation to her garden party, which she would have received by the first post this morning. He was quite ready to put his theory to the test when Lady Ambermere arrived at the suitable distance for his conveniently observing her and for taking off his hat. She always treated him like a boy, which he liked. The usual salutation passed. "I don't know where my people are," said Lady Ambermere majestically. "Have you seen my motor?" "Yes, dear lady, it's in at your own arms," said Georgie brightly. "Happy motor." If Lady Ambermere unbent to anybody, she unbent to Georgie. He was of quite good family, because his mother had been a Bartlett and a second cousin of her deceased husband. Sometimes, when she talked to Georgie, she said "we," implying thereby his connection with the aristocracy, and this gratified Georgie nearly as much as did her treatment of him as being quite a boy still. It was to him, as a boy still, that she answered. "Well, the happy motor, you little rascal, must come to my arms instead of being at them," she said, with the quick wit for which Riseholme pronounced her famous. "Fancy being able to see my motor at that distance. Young eyes!" It was really young spectacles, but Georgie did not mind that. In fact, he would not have corrected the mistake for the world. "Shall I run across and fetch it for you?" he asked. "In a minute, or whistle on your fingers like a vulgar street boy," said Lady Ambermere. "I'm sure you know how to." Georgie had not the slightest idea, but with the courage of youth, presuming, with the prudence of middle age, that he would not really be called upon to perform so unimaginable a feat, he put 2 fingers up to his mouth. "Here goes then," he said, greatly daring. He knew perfectly well that the dignity of Lady Ambermere would not permit rude vulgar whistling, of which he was hopelessly incapable, to summon her motor. She made a feint of stopping her ears with her hands. "Don't do anything of the kind," she said. "In a minute you shall walk with me across to the Arms. But tell me this first. I have just been to say to our good Mrs Lucas that very likely I will look in at her garden party on Friday, if I have nothing else to do. But who is this wonderful creature she is expecting? Is it an Indian conjurer? If so, I should like to see him, because when Ambermere